Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is James Roberts. Welcome to the August 20th edition of Effective, Efficient, Affordable, and above all, accountable to you. We have been on break here through the summer whilst Channel 13 have been, or Charter I should say, have been refurbishing their studios. They have done a wonderful job here. If any one of you is even contemplating starting your own TV show, the facilities and the staff are really second to none. Get on down here and do your show. Because we have, as I say, been on break for a while, I would like to start this evening's program with a review of some of the burning issues that we left you with back in June and just how they have developed over the summer. I like to think of this as Winstead ripped from the headlines. We're going to talk about four issues, and they are the issues which should have been consuming the press over the course of the last 8 or 9 weeks. I'm going to stop this right there and say that those of you who are avid readers of the Winchester papers may perhaps be a little surprised by these headlines. You will not have seen them in the newspapers, in fact. And maybe we'll do a show on that subject in the coming weeks. The idea that the newspapers here in Winstead have made the decision to report not what is actually happening here in town, but what a particular political constituency here in Winchester would like to have them believe is happening in town. But anyway, the four topics I'd like to discuss this evening, ripped from the headlines, as I say, are first and foremost the scapegoating of Henry. This obviously refers to Henry Centrella, our former finance director. Of deficits and deadbeats, the idea that we have as a matter of strategy and policy chosen to stiff our creditors. The Goomba conspiracy, a brazen attempt to expand the powers of the Board of Selectmen at the expense of the citizens here in town. And finally, a matter rich in irony. ACLU spanks Nader mayor, something you didn't expect to see in the hometown of Ralph Nader. So, the first issue, the scapegoating of Henry. We have been told for months and months and months and months that Henry has been stealing us blind. Now, the chief communicators of this message have been the town manager, Dale Martin, and the community lawyer, Charlene Lavoie. Neither of these two individuals has wasted a single moment has wasted a single opportunity, I should say, to tell us how much money Henry has been stealing from us. And yet so many of you are confused. So many of you have asked me, Dale keeps saying he's stealing money, Charlene keeps saying he's stealing money, there's been a civil lawsuit filed, there was an agreement reached in the Bantam Superior Court, but Henry is still wandering our streets. What's the deal? Well, let's be very clear, ladies and gentlemen, and the short answer is nothing has changed over the summer. Henry has not been charged with any crime. Henry has not been arrested. Henry has not been tried. Henry has not been convicted. This remains a matter of he said, she said. With the he, in this case Dale Martin and Charlene Lavoie, saying Henry's been stealing us blind, and Henry largely keeping quiet on the matter. At no point has credible testimony or credible evidence been given to us, the public, that Henry actually took money. At no point has credible evidence been forwarded to the effect that anyone has taken money. At no time has credible evidence been brought forward to the public that the money that it is claimed Henry stole ever actually existed. Now, you and I would say, it's hardly reasonable, it's hardly plausible that there were millions and millions and millions of dollars of cash floating around Town Hall. Just as you or I would say it is hardly plausible that there were millions and millions and millions of dollars walking out the door just as the town manager and the Board of Finance looked on. Do we really think it's reasonable that there was that much cash here? Do we really think it's reasonable that the powers that be, our civic leaders, just sat and watched as it walked out the door? No. No one has presented credible evidence that Henry took any money, that anyone took any money, or that the so-called missing money ever actually existed. The one thing that we do know for sure, is that Henry was instructed to move heaven on earth to keep the town afloat, despite the fact that known significant budget items were not included in our tax revenues. Let me state that more clearly. We knew we had to pay the bonds, and yet we never raised a dollar of taxes to pay them. It's that simple. The Board of Selectmen, the town manager, told Henry to do whatever was needed to make that impossible situation actually work. That's the one thing that we know for a fact. And in recognition of that fact, in recognition of the fact that perhaps Henry is not looking quite as villainous as certain parties would have you believe, even the town manager is now beginning to back off. In the last several weeks in the Winsted Journal, the town manager wrote an article in which he acknowledged that the overall financial problem faced by Winsted dwarfs any money that Henry may actually have taken. Now, I don't agree with the town manager's numbers. He uses a number of $7.5 million as his notion of the problem facing Winsted. I would use a higher number. But we would both agree, ladies and gentlemen, we would both agree that the problem that faces Winsted is many, many times even the most exaggerated idea of what Henry walked out the door with. In fact, we would both go so far as to agree that if Henry were to show up in Town Hall tomorrow with $2.25 million, the $2.25 million that he is supposed to have stolen, our situation would not be much better than it is today. We would still have mountains of unpaid bills. We would still have a deficit from prior years past. We would still have a growing deficit baked into this year's budget. And we would still have a political establishment that is all too comfortable with deficit spending. The fact of the matter is, even if Henry, should he ultimately ever be found guilty of the charges that have been made against him by the town manager and the community lawyer, he's a very small portion of the problem that we actually face. Now let me be clear. If Henry did in fact steal money, that is a very wicked thing. That is a betrayal of our community's trust. And let me be equally clear. If it is ever substantiated in court that Henry stole money, then that is not just a wicked thing, it is quite probably a crime, and that there will be punishment for that crime. But rather than expending our efforts talking about punishment for crimes for which there is no evidence currently presented to the public, rather than simply proceeding on the basis of innuendo and character assassination, let's talk about the real thing that Henry is guilty of. Henry was the one man in our community perfectly positioned to raise the red flag and say, your town manager, your Board of Finance are driving you into a ditch. Henry was the one man, along with the auditor, who could say, we are routinely spending millions of dollars more than we are bringing in taxes. Henry was the one man who can say, I have been told to empty every account in Town Hall in order to pay the bonds. That is what Henry should have been saying at each and every opportunity in increasingly loud voice. And that, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, is the real betrayal that we should be talking about. Henry was a good soldier. He did what he was told to do. He kept the town afloat. He was a genius. That the plan of siphoning money through water and sewer was pure genius. It created cash without hitting the fund balance. And for that, we have to recognize as being Henry's fault. Henry didn't tell us we were driving the town into the ditch. Let that be Henry's crime. Which brings us to the second topic, deficits and deadbeats. 2 years ago, we had a deficit of $1.2 million. The town manager refused to accept it. The only way we know about it was from the Board of Education. By the end of last year, that deficit had doubled in size to $2.5 million. Once again, that deficit did not arise from any actions of Henry. That deficit arose from simply spending more money than we raised in taxes. That deficit arose from a series of broken budgets. Budgets that were intentionally entered into by the town manager, the Board of Finance, and then the community. Budgets which we knew to be broken. Budgets which had phantom, bogus revenues. Budgets which never incorporated known expenses, the bonds, amongst others. That's where our deficit comes from, ladies and gentlemen. $2.5 million as of June 2013, according to our finance manager. Our town manager has never really provided us any data on the deficit. But the good news, ladies and gentlemen, is that the budget that we passed in May was supposed to fix the deficit. Remember the magic mill, ladies and gentlemen? The magic mill that was going to go into the fund balance and cure our credit profile? The magic mill that at the same time we were going to spend on paying past bills? No one ever quite explained how that was going to happen, how we could both spend money and save money at the same time. But the magic mill was supposed to fix our credit rating, fix our credit profile, fix our deficit. And the base budget itself was supposed to be sufficiently robust that the deficit would not be grown. Every expense was supposedly scrubbed. Every revenue, likewise, scrubbed. You were sold a story that the budget would stop the deficit from growing, begin to whittle down the deficit, and fix our fiscal and credit problem. Now, we, amongst others, were highly skeptical of this at the time. We told you that the budget was a crock of shit. We told you that it was filled with bogus revenues, the insurance revenues and the like. We told you that it was filled with hidden expenses. Once again, the bonds. But you passed it. Now, many months later, we are collecting the results of that decision. With each week, we find another bogus revenue or another hidden expense. As recently as yesterday, we learned of a $90,000 contractual obligation that we owe the ambulance company, not included in the budget. That's an extra $90,000 of deficit right there. But still, the town manager says, don't worry. The budget is robust, and revenues are coming in faster and higher than expected. We're collecting more in tax revenue than we actually budgeted to collect. We're collecting more in Sheila revenues at town clerk than we budgeted to collect. We're collecting more in building department revenues than we expected to collect. And because we're collecting so much more than we expected, that's gonna hide, or that's gonna cover for the fact that there may have been a few snafus in the actual budget. That's the bill of goods you were sold, ladies and gentlemen. Trouble is, it doesn't seem to be reflecting reality. Once again, last night we were told that the timetable for paying off all of the existing old bills from last year, that is off the table. Those bills were supposed to be paid by the end of this month, August. The town finance manager has now said that is no longer possible. No longer possible to stick to the timetable, despite the fact that we have more money than we budgeted. And it gets better, ladies and gentlemen. The school board was informed by the school's finance manager last week that the school board could not pay payroll between now and Christmas. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Having passed a budget that was supposed to fix our fiscal problem, that was supposed to stop the deficit from growing, that was supposed to reduce the deficit, we now find ourselves in a situation where, despite increased revenues, we can no longer stick to the timetable for paying off old bills, and now cannot even pay our existing bills. We are already delinquent with the Gilbert contract, our largest single vendor. And the Board of Ed has been told it cannot pay teachers. We're not talking about missing a field trip here. We're not talking about a late electricity bill. The Board of Ed has been told it cannot make payroll. All through last year, we always made payroll. And the town manager said this budget would make the situation better. Well, if we made payroll last year, but we can't make it this year, then clearly the situation is getting worse. Far, far worse. Now, throughout this discussion, I've referred to the town manager's numbers, and I do so quite wishingly. Now, Dale Martin, the town manager, would readily tell you that he knows nothing about finances, and I think we can all agree with him on that score. He would also tell you that he relies exclusively on his finance manager for matters of financial acumen, and this is where we begin to disagree. Because the fact of the matter is that Dale Martin is responsible for the finances of this town. He is the town manager. He is the CEO. He has hiring and firing and evaluating responsibility for the finance manager. Every single number that comes out of town hall is Dale Martin's number. The only person that he shares any responsibility for these numbers with is the Board of Finance. I make this point now because it will become useful later in the program. I've been Chicken Little on the subject of the deficit. People have said I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. Well, if you want a third-party corroboration, look at Moody's. Moody's has downgraded our credit rating 3 times under the mayoralty of Perez and Welcome. And they put us on warning for a 4th downgrade. I'm not an expert, I can't say definitively, but I would be willing to bet that 3 downgrades and a threatened 4th is probably a record. It puts us in such select company as Detroit, or Stockton, or Deep River. Towns that are bankrupt, whose pensioners have been whacked, whose health benefits have been whacked, whose employees have been whacked. All coming attractions that Winstead can look forward to. Not content with reducing our credit rating, Moody's actually withdrew it. Now, they provided very simple rationale for this, and it has nothing to do with Henry. The rationale for cutting the rating was very simple. Winchester is addicted to deficit spending. Winchester doesn't have the political will to restructure its expenses or to regularize its revenues. Winchester is addicted to deficit spending and will, in due course, spend every dollar it has and more, and will go bankrupt. That is what Moody's is telling us. The rationale for withdrawal of the rating, again, nothing to do with Henry, and actually nothing to do with the deficit. Moody's words were, and I quote, "They withdrew the rating because the information from the town was insufficient or otherwise inadequate." Moody's is telling us not only is our financial picture grim, but they don't believe a word we're telling them. They don't believe a word we're telling them. You want third-party corroboration of how bad the deficit is? It's right there. 4 downgrades and the credit rating withdrawn because they don't believe anything we're telling them. So what do the numbers actually look like? Is Moody's right in saying the information's a bit dodgy? Well, last night we had a finance report. We learned that we had collected in taxes $11 million in August and July, $11 million. And we also learned that we have $6 million left. Just $6 million left, ladies and gentlemen. Do the math. Collected 11, got 6 left. That means we spent, in the last 6 weeks, $5 million. And we have, for the next 20 weeks, just $6 million left. You do the math, ladies and gentlemen. We spent $5 million in the first 6 weeks, and we have only $6 million left for the last 20 weeks. Oops. And it gets better. If you want to know how we spent that $5 million, well, about $1.2 million was on old bills, according to the finance director. About $3 million was in operations. And then there's a mystery gap. A little under $1 million. Sort of feels like the deficit may actually be $3 to $3.5 million rather than the $2.5 that we have been told about. Now, there may be a perfectly rational explanation for these discrepancies, ladies and gentlemen. But the point is, we are continually being given bad information, incomplete information. And the longer you give us incomplete information, the less likely we are to trust you when you finally fess up with the real stuff. Which brings us to the Goomba conspiracy. What, might you ask, is the Goomba conspiracy? Well, put simply, the Goomba conspiracy is an attempt led by Selectman Perez and Clausen with the able assistance of the community lawyer Charlene Lavoie to eliminate the Water and Sewer Commission. Now, why, you might ask, would we want to eliminate the Water and Sewer Commission? Well, the logic is tortured, but follow me. The story goes that Water and Sewer was given bad information, albeit information that was supported by the auditors, namely that Henry told them that they were paying their way. And the auditors agreed. This from the 2011 audit. Water and Sewer Fund resources have been sufficient to fully pay principal of and interest on outstanding water and sewer obligations. Water and Sewer have enough money to satisfy their bills. Same information that Henry gave them. But it's not the information that the Board of Finance feels was the right information. They prefer the information that says Water and Sewer has a big debt to the town. And so they said, Water and Sewer, you need to fix the bad decisions you have made. You need to have a giant rate increase. And Water and Sewer said, okay, you want a rate increase? We'll give you a rate increase. It was described by the Board of Finance as a 20% and 35% respectively on water and sewer rates. It was actually significantly greater than that. But that wasn't enough for Candy and George. They didn't just want the Water and Sewer Commission to fix their mistakes in their mind. They wanted to eliminate them altogether. They said, and follow the logic here, we, the Board of Finance, gave you bad information through the agency of Henry. You made decisions based on that bad information, and because you made a bad decision, we're going to punish you, and we're going to take your operations, and we're going to take them over. We, the people who gave you the bad information. That's the logic, ladies and gentlemen. Give water and sewer to the people who actually came up with the bad numbers to begin with. Brilliant. So what's really going on? What's really going on with the Goomba conspiracy? The simple answer is it's an elimination of the only check and balance that we have here in town. Every audit letter, every management letter for years has said you need checks and balances. You have too much power in the hands of your Board of Finance, your town manager, your finance manager. You need a series of checks and balances. And water and sewer was that check and balance. And quite simply, the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, doesn't want its power checked. They want access to the one great power that water and sewer has, the ability to raise taxes without going to referendum. You've already experienced it once. that 20%, 35% increase that turned out to be closer to 50 and 100%. The Board of Selectmen want to be able to do that quarter in and quarter out with nary a vote. Now the good news, ladies and gentlemen, is the Goomba conspiracy can only take place if you agree to it at referendum in November. Whoever you vote for in November, make sure you vote no on the Goomba conspiracy. Brings us finally to the ACLU. Again, the crowning irony of the summer. This story, you'll remember, started with Candy Perez and her infamous skunks. Candy, you recall, said the public were skunks and she didn't want to listen to skunks. Selectman Renzullo doubled down. He said public comment was a waste of his valuable time, him being a successful businessman and all. Mayor Welcome, the ever-accommodating Mayor Welcome, reacted to these criticisms with a series of highly improper and, as it turned out, illegal curbs on public comment. She muzzled the skunks. The ACLU shows up and points out that those curbs are illegal. Marianne changes the curbs. The ACLU shows up a second time and says, okay, you've met the constitutional requirements of free speech, but you've just trampled all over your own charter. Mayor Welcome finally stepped back from the brink. Now, those of you who know her well know that she does not concede defeat graciously. The newspaper referred to Mayor Welcome as pounding the podium with her ruler, shrieking for civility. For those of you of a certain age who saw Nikita Khrushchev in that moment pounding the podium of the United Nations with his shoe, well, I suppose appearances are in the eye of the beholder. For the rest of you who saw a tired teacher calling for discipline from her unruly charges, perhaps you saw something that is closer to the mark. In either case, we saw something that smacked of defiance in the face of public opinion. These are the four issues, ladies and gentlemen, that have dominated the summer. The scapegoating of Henry, deficits and deadbeats, the Goomba conspiracy, and the ACLU spanking. There's a common thread here, ladies and gentlemen. We have a single massive looming problem. It is the deficit. It was supposed to be, if not fixed, at least significantly improved in our last budget. And yet we have learnt that the last budget is as inadequate as every budget that has preceded it. And the deficit is ballooning to the point where we can no longer make payroll. Let's be very clear, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we're not talking about a late electricity bill, a missed field trip, a few odds and ends missed around the edges. We are talking about payroll in the schools. We can't make payroll per the school's finance director. Is that the sign of a deficit that's under control? I don't think so. And in the face of a deficit which is clearly not under control, the town manager has been desperately trying to divert your attention to Henry, to water and sewer. And it hasn't been working, ladies and gentlemen. We know that the deficit is a result of Winstead's addiction to spending in excess of what it brings in. No amount of scapegoating Henry, no amount of scapegoating water and sewer is going to change that. And so the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen is going the direct route. They're going to take over water and sewer completely and take over its ability to raise taxes without a public vote. This is the most egregious overreach of Board of Selectmen authority that we have seen in decades. It's as simple as that. And acknowledging that it is the most egregious overreach that we have seen in decades, the mayor has tried to muzzle the public reaction to that overreach. We have a problem, ladies and gentlemen. It's the deficit. We need to fix it. We must either restructure our expenses or regularize our revenues. But one way or another, we have to pay the past bills and we have to pay the current bills. Selectman Perez's notion that you can carry around the deficit for year after year just doesn't actually work. We can't pay school teachers, ladies and gentlemen. We are exposed to every slightest small hiccup along the way. We need to fix the deficit. We need to restructure expenses. We need to regularize revenues, because then we have to fix the big problem that Winstead faces. The deficit is just the immediate problem. The big problem is the tax base. We have to end the war on downtown. We have to reinvest in our tax base. We have to grow our community so that we can afford the investment and services that we so richly deserve. We cannot do that until we have fixed the deficit. We cannot fix the deficit until we have stopped blaming it on phantoms, on Henry and water and sewer. We cannot fix the deficit until we acknowledge what the problem really is: expenses and revenues. And we cannot do any of these things while allowing our mayor to simply trample on our rights of free speech. Government must be accountable. We cannot hold our government accountable if they refuse to tell us what they are doing. If everything is done behind the cloak, behind the curtain, in the smoke-filled room, how are we supposed to know what we are to hold them accountable for? We have simple rules. Is the budget balanced? Yes or no? It's not. Is the deficit growing? Yes or no? It is. Are our employees actually getting paid? Yes or no? It seems like they're not going to be paid. And that's before you get to, have the potholes been fixed, or have we repaired the bridges? The summer has been a summer of lots happening and little happening. Lots of the same, and very little of any real sense of progress. We need to get our arms around the deficit. We either need to cut expenses or we need a major supplemental tax. It is that simple. There are Democrats on the Board of Selectmen running for re-election who don't want to listen to that message. They don't want to tell you that, yeah, that Roberts guy, he's right. Moody's, right. That the deficit we can't live with, this idea from Candy that we can somehow walk around with millions of dollars of unpaid bills, that doesn't work. No one wants to tell you that because they want to get re-elected. Well, I'm not running for re-election, ladies and gentlemen. I'm on the Board of Ed. I'm staying on the Board of Ed. And I'm telling you how I see it. We need to fix the deficit so that we can fix Winstead. It's really that simple. We cannot be the town that gets spanked by the ACLU for muzzling free speech. We cannot be the town that runs itself by the Gumbach conspiracy. We cannot be the town that vilifies its employees when there is no credible evidence presented to the effect that its employees have done anything wrong. We should be the town that recognizes its problems and fixes them. And with your help, we can be that town. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And over the next several weeks, we'll be doing more shows. We'll do a show on the candidates for the selectmen. As I say, we'll review the press coverage here in town and how that seems to be working. And we'll just follow some of these issues as they pan out. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you and good night.
Goombas, meet the Goombas. They're the modern Stone Age family. From the town of Winstead, they're a page right out of his story. Let's ride with the family down the street, through the courtesy of Candy's feet. When you're with the Goombas, you'll have a yabba dabba do time, a dabba do time, on our way to bankruptcy.